You pay attention with so much at stake.
Seas are rising and chronic flooding will be the new normal.
You navigate, you listen, you keep an ear out. You pay attention, and so do we. We tell the stories of our time every day.
In the 26th day of testimony and on the 139th witness, Shahar Tsarnaev wept.
We unearth what would otherwise stay hidden.
There's just a lot of hate in this world, and that day, for that hour, we were humans.
Across the street.
The Red Sox have won the World Series.
And around the globe.
It's here and now.
This is modern love.
This is WBUR's All Things Considered.
This is only a game.
This is On Point.
This is Radio Boston.
On air, online, on demand, and on stage in the heart of Boston.
I'm Jack Lepiars. Welcome to WBUR City Space.
Always looking forward, paying attention, and knowing that your story is one of our stories.
Good morning. I'm Bob Epps.
I'm Lisa Mullins.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty.
I'm Jeremy Hobson.
This is 90.9 WBUR Boston.
Check.
All right. Here we go.
Welcome to WBUR City Space. Who's been here before? All right. Well, this is good. We have a lot of new people in the audience. Just in case, in case you want to ask questions at the end, we're going to do some Q&A. Just a little programming note here. It is via Slido, and you just go to slido.com, and then you input this code. And that's how you can submit questions, and we'll do that at the end.
Fancy.
Yeah, it is kind of fancy. If you're, for some reason, confused and in the wrong place, this is Jon Favreau. Maybe you've heard of him. He hosts a very successful podcast, co-hosts a podcast called Pod Save America, and also is the founder of Crooked Media, a media and podcast company. Is that fair to say? Can I say it that way?
Would you say podcast company?
A media and podcast company.
Perfect.
Yeah, that works. Cool.
Aspiring media conglomerate.
Yeah, and also, a graduate, a valedictorian of Holy Cross. Any Holy Cross people here? Just a couple. And we're going to talk about Holy Cross, but first, I think we should just probably hear. So I thought maybe you took a red eye, but you didn't take a red eye. You were here last night.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, Venezuela, Sudan, a lot of big news stories happening right now.
Right.
But you're probably the big story of the morning is probably Julian Assange, right?
Yeah, I've been trying to catch up on that before I got here.
No pressure. But he was arrested.
I always do the outline for the show the night before, so we have a show tonight in Boston,
right?
Which did not have Julian Assange on it. So
but it will now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question going. I mean, there had been thanks to some leak in DC. People had known that there was sealed charges against Julian Assange as far back as November. And I think the question a lot of people had was, are they going to indict him for publishing stolen information, which is technically against the law, but something that prosecutors have in the past let go because they don't want to chill press freedoms? Or will they find something else to indict him on that will not necessarily chill press freedoms? And it does seem like what they've indicted him for is helping Chelsea Manning hack or basically offering to help Chelsea Manning hack into computers to steal the information, which, is a more solid charge in terms of press freedoms, though since he didn't succeed in helping her hack, right. I don't know how strong the case is that the prosecution necessarily has against Assange. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and I guess in some ways it's the reason that he's finally been yanked out of the consulate is partly because his his relationship with his landlords has gone south.
Yes, finally. No, but I saw Senator Mark Warner of Virginia said this morning, like, however Julian Assange started, whatever he thought he was doing when he started WikiLeaks, what he has become is an agent of the Russian government,
right?
And tried to help them interfere with our elections and also, subvert Western democracy.
How connected to the larger story of Trump and election interference do you feel like he really is? I mean, I feel like we're in such a crazy timeline right now.
Yeah.
That I almost forgot that he was involved in any way, if that makes sense.
No, look, I mean, I don't think we know yet because we haven't seen the full Mueller report.
Right.
But in the indictments that Mueller has brought so far, you do see your repeated references to Organization 1, which is WikiLeaks.
Right.
So clearly, at the very least, they were a conduit.
Right.
I think what Mueller clearly couldn't prove, because he has no indictments related to Assange himself, is that Assange coordinated with anyone in the Russian government. I mean, I think they assume he does, but they didn't. They would have brought indictments to that effect if they had the evidence. And I think, counter-intel investigations are difficult because when you're trying to gather evidence that involves sort of an international conspiracy, it's much trickier than having evidence for, your garden variety conspiracy within the United States to help a foreign power subvert the election.
So speaking of the Mueller report, you guys have talked about this for a long time on the show.
Yeah.
But we're in this kind of weird period where the report's out, nobody really knows what's in it. I feel like it's kind of like the nadir. It's like the worst part of this story in some ways, because now it's just like wild speculation all the time.
Yeah.
How do you guys think about that on the show? I don't know. How are you feeling?
We're
that good, huh?
Days I just want to scream. I mean, we're waiting for the full report, right?
Right.
Like,
which could come next week.
Yeah, which
potentially
it seems
redacted.
like it might come next week.
Right.
I remember there were many times in the pod where specifically Dan Pfeiffer and I would say, like, we know what's coming. If Bob Mueller does not frog march Donald Trump out of the White House with like Don Jr. behind him in handcuffs,
right?
And because he has a tape recording of Donald Trump on the phone with Vladimir Putin saying "let's collude," anything short of that is not going to be enough for the national media. Certainly, it's not going to be enough for all the conspiracy tin hat folks on Fox, but it's not even going to be enough for the national media. And they're going to say, "Oh, Democrats overplayed their hands," and Donald Trump is exonerated and the clouds are lifted, all this bullshit. And all of that happened, except all of that happened based on a 4-page letter from Donald Trump's handpicked attorney general.
Right.
And even in that letter, he admitted that Robert Mueller did not exonerate him on obstruction of justice. And in fact, there is substantial evidence that the president obstructed justice.
So what do you think about the fact that Mueller stopped short of this, of sort of this obstruction of justice piece? And what do you think of the theory that, in a way, it could be Mueller trying to force Barr into making moves that might get awkward for the administration and also crack open the door for Democrats in the House to do more digging?
Yeah, so I think we don't know why Mueller declined, right? Like that's obviously the big question. But a couple things we do know, partly because of Barr's testimony yesterday.
Right.
So Barr said that Mueller did not tell him to make the decision to decline prosecution.
Right.
So why Barr did that on his own is crazy.
Right.
Especially because Barr previously, and as well as all kinds of other legal experts on the right, left, center, all across the spectrum, have said that the Department of Justice has guidelines that say you cannot indict a sitting president. So why would the Attorney General's office decide whether they were indicting or not indicting Donald Trump anyway if you can't indict a sitting president? Now, in the letter, Barr said this has nothing to do with those regulations, but those regulations exist, so what is he talking about? So that's that. He also said, by the way, that Mueller did not tell him, I want Congress to make the decision. He didn't say he didn't want Congress to make the decision.
Right.
I mean, you would think that because there are DOJ guidelines saying you can't indict a sitting president, that in Bob Mueller's mind, he would say, okay, my job is to lay out the evidence for why the president obstructed justice, lay out the evidence that says maybe he didn't obstruct justice or it doesn't rise to the level of a crime, and then my job is to let the United States Congress decide whether the president is guilty or not through impeachment hearings, which impeachment was made for just this purpose.
Right.
It's not a guilty, it's not a conviction. Right. It doesn't mean that Donald Trump's going to be convicted out of office, but you hold an impeachment hearing because the president, unlike anyone else in the entire country, cannot be indicted in office and tried. And so that's what Congress is for.
Speaking of what Congress is for, can you talk a little bit about the Democratic majority in the House? And just, I don't know, I'm not necessarily asking for a scorecard, but like, where what interests you about what the Democrats are doing in the House right now, and what are they failing at, in your view?
Yeah. So I think Nancy Pelosi has a very tough job because when you look back to 2018 and why we won and how we won, this was not some like liberal progressive supermajority that swept into Congress, right?
Yeah, I was going to say we won.
Yeah, right. We did win, landslide, right? Most seats that Democrats have picked up since Watergate.
But you wouldn't know it from some of the coverage, right?
Right. No, you would not know it. Once again, the coverage really nailed it. But a lot of these seats that we won were in very red districts. Yep. You had everything from winning safe seats and very liberal Congress people winning safe seats that were Democrat through primary, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Yep. You have a bunch of Democrats who won districts that voted for Romney but voted for Clinton in 2016. And then you had some Democrats, a few of the House Democrats, win districts that voted for Trump but had voted for Obama in the past, and they came back to the Democrats. And so those last two categories of seats, those people won their seats by talking about health care and the Republican attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act over and over and over again in their districts. They made the election about that issue, and that's why they're there, right? So these people, these representatives, when they get to Congress and they hear that Democrats want to do a bunch of investigations of Donald Trump, that they want to get the tax returns, that they want to possibly pursue impeachment, it gets them nervous.
Yep.
And it gets them nervous because they think, well, that's not what people in my district care about. They care about healthcare. They don't pay much attention to what's going on in Washington. They don't pay much attention to investigations and all that bullshit. They really care about what's going on with their lives, their wages, their jobs, their healthcare. And so I get that. But on the other hand, like, we now have a president of the United States who potentially committed a crime, multiple crimes. Federal prosecutors have already decided that there's enough evidence to say that he is an unindicted co-conspirator in a separate crime where he paid hush money to adult film actresses.
Right.
And a crime which we know is a crime because Michael Cohen is going to jail for it and pled guilty to it.
Right.
And if Donald Trump was not a president, he very well probably would have been indicted as well. And now that we have a president who is, he's down at the border. He's telling Customs and Border Patrol agents to refuse asylum and not listen to judges, to lock people up anyway. He's got his Treasury Secretary telling the IRS to not give up his tax returns, even though the law says the Treasury, the IRS shall provide tax returns upon Congress's request of any taxpayers. It is as clear as possible in the law.
They're like, why are you here, Treasury Secretary? Why are you
You're not supposed to do this.
Right.
And then you've got, his handpicked attorney general out there saying, yeah, maybe I will look into spying and all these conspiracy theories that Donald Trump has dredged up, even though there's no evidence they occurred. And in fact, there's evidence to the contrary. So you have a president who is sort of assaulting norms, institutions, stepping up his attacks on the rule of law itself, potentially breaking laws himself. And I think the Democrats have to ask themselves, okay, we know that voters don't really care about these issues as much as they care about sort of economic issues that affect their lives. But what is the consequence of us just taking a pass and looking the other way as the President of the United States flouts the rule of law, potentially commits crimes, and we're not going to go after that, and we're not going to spend time on that, and we're not going to undergo impeachment hearings because we're afraid of the politics?
Right.
Because we're worried, like, that might get you through the next election, but what kind of precedent does that set? What does that set for future presidents? What does that set for this president? Because the more he knows he can get away with this stuff, the further he's going to push the envelope. We've already seen that. He's also out there last night calling Democrats treasonous. Treasonous for starting the Mueller investigation, which they didn't do. Treasonous for not agreeing with his immigration policy. I mean, it's not like winning the House in 2018 has checked his behavior in any way.
Right.
And the only way we can check his behavior is if the House uses the power that the voters gave them. And sometimes you have to do stuff that isn't necessarily politically easy, even though you have to do what's right, and you have to think about your obligations to the Constitution and the rule of law.
So what I'm hearing, and forgive me, we are at the beautiful WBUR City Space, and I am a public radio journalist, but also at least a fan of the pod. So what I hear you saying is that Democrats have to eat a shit sandwich, and that
they're very good at. They've been eating them for years.
Right.
They are connoisseurs of shit sandwiches in the Democratic Party. We ate them all through 8 years of the White House. They're like served them at the mess every day.
You guys, on the other, one of your kind of live Q&As that you did with listeners recently, you guys talked a little bit about Mitch McConnell and
my favorite people.
Yeah. And how he's just this kind of linchpin, even looking forward at 2020 and trying to figure out sort of how the Democrats win. And obviously, I think everyone here probably knows that your show comes from a pro-democratic perspective. It's a progressive show.
We're on the fence.
So I guess I'd like to get a sense of whether, we're thinking about the House, we're thinking about the presidential run.
Yeah.
How should we be thinking about the Senate? Because that seems like incredibly important.
Incredibly important. I don't think we think about it enough.
Yeah.
The Senate is probably, if there were no Donald Trump, if it had been just a traditional Republican president, the Senate would probably be the biggest obstacle in the country to progressive change right now.
Yeah.
There's so what's the reason for this, right? Like the Senate has always been an anti-majoritarian institution, right? From the very beginning. That's the whole idea. Wyoming gets 2 senators and so does California, right? That by itself isn't the problem we're facing right now.
Okay.
The problem is we have had geographic polarization over the last couple decades, meaning that we are now partisan by where we live in a way that we hadn't before. So urban centers are Democratic and liberal, and rural areas are much more conservative, and then the suburbs are the battlegrounds. But now you're seeing things like, voters in Houston, in Phoenix, in Jacksonville, in Atlanta have much more in common with voters in Boston and New York and Los Angeles than they do with the people in the rural areas of their own state. And because of that, Now, all the states that are sparsely populated in the rural areas are deep, deep red states for Republicans. And the states that have a lot of population are deep, deep blue states. And that wasn't always the case before we sort of moved along these geographic lines for polarization. So therefore, there is no scenario within the next 2, 3, 4 elections where the Democrats could ever capture 60 votes in the U.S. Senate, which is just a hard thing to and that is if we run the table on every competitive seat that is up.
Speaking of tough sandwiches.
Yeah. And so this is why, because everyone's like, why are you suddenly become so obsessed with the filibuster, right? Like, it's a weird fetish for me. I realize that.
Go on.
But the problem is, there's just no path for us to get 60 votes in the Senate. And, aside from that, there used to be a universe where there were moderate Republicans.
Right.
Even when probably not by the time Obama got to the presidency, but I remember when I was in the Senate with him, he worked with Dick Lugar from Indiana on nonproliferation. We worked with an extremely conservative senator from Oklahoma, Tom Coburn, on ethics reform. We don't have that anymore. We don't have Republicans in the Senate that are willing to work with Democrats or anything. Maybe Susan Collins once in a while, maybe Lisa Murkowski once in a while on certain issues, but that's about it. And so when I talk to all these presidential candidates, a lot of them are proposing very ambitious policies, which is great. I happen to believe we need a lot of ambitious policies because, economic inequality is at levels we haven't seen since the Great Depression. And yet, what I want to know from them is, well, what are your plans to get this passed? Because even if we run the table in the Senate in 2020, which will require the following. Doug Jones is up again in Alabama. That is going to be a very difficult seat to keep. So let's go worst case scenario. Let's say we don't keep Alabama. We need to then flip 4 Senate seats for Democrats to win. We have Arizona, which is tough but doable. Colorado, which we should definitely flip.
Yeah.
We don't flip Colorado, we have huge problems. Maine, which, we should be able to flip, but Susan Collins is very, very popular up there. And
well-established,
so it could be very hard. And then we have to flip either Iowa, North Carolina, Georgia, or Texas, which are all very, very, very tricky.
Right.
And so even if we do those, say we flipped all of them and Doug Jones kept the seat, we would not be near 60. And then the question is, you have 55, 56 seats in the Senate, and you got either President Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden or whoever.
Right.
And they're saying Medicare for all, Green New Deal, blah, blah. None of that's getting through if you have the filibuster in place. It's just not.
Right. So how do you deal with that? I mean, how bummed out are you?
I mean, I'm
You're talking about this stuff all the time, and right now I hear you saying like it's never going to happen. I
think eliminating the filibuster could be possible. My hope is that we get 51 seats in the Senate or 50 seats in the Senate, and then the tie is broken by the vice president.
Right.
And we have a president at least who is pushing for the elimination of the filibuster. It's still then not up to the president. It's up to Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, assuming Chuck Schumer becomes majority leader in this instance. And then it's a long slog in the Senate because I think you'd find that there's a lot of Democratic senators right now who are nervous about it as well. But the reason I think this is so important, the bigger reason here, is what I have come to realize is that when Democrats get into power, we are the party that tells people government has the capacity to make a positive difference in your lives. And if we don't do that when we're in power, if we can't actually pass the policies that we talked about on the campaign trail, what that does is it deepens people's cynicism in politics and government.
Right.
It makes people think that their politicians say a lot of stuff on the campaign trail and then don't actually mean it when they get into office. And then that cynicism turns into apathy and indifference, and people start participating in politics. And that kind of cynicism, that's fine for the Republican Party because their philosophy is government can't run a one-car parade, and everyone should be on their own, and everyone should just live their own lives, and we don't care about government that much. So when people don't care that much about government and politics, it redounds to the conservative sort of free market ideology. It really hurts Democrats and the progressive ideology. And even going back to the Affordable Care Act, one of our biggest issues with that was, we passed the Affordable Care Act in 2010, and it doesn't really become fully implemented until years later, and it's not popular until 2017, basically, 7 years later. Then it's finally popular because people start to feel the benefits, and the Republicans try to take it away, and now the ACA is very, very popular. But next time Democrats get into power, we need to start passing programs and policies that have an immediate effect on people's lives.
In the same way, I guess, are you saying in the same way that the ACA did?
Except if I
fast,
was doing the
even
ACA
faster?
again, I would have the implementation much faster.
Right.
And I would make sure that the benefits of the ACA came on the front end.
Okay.
As opposed to some of the stuff on the back end, right?
Yeah.
Before you're taxing people on a mandate,
right?
Make sure that they understand these are the different benefits that I'm getting. And I got these benefits because a bunch of Democrats went to Washington, worked really hard, and they delivered on the promises they made in the campaign trail.
Also, make sure the website works.
And make sure the website works. Use Squarespace.
This talk is sponsored by Squarespace. So I want to get into 2019. I'm sorry, 2020. We're in 2019. But I'm going to unceremoniously pull out my phone here because I have some programming notes that I make sure I want to make sure I mention. But while I do that, can you talk a little bit about how you guys are going to talk to every single Democratic candidate, even with the number of shows you put out? Because I think there were like 10 more this morning. That's not true, but it
probably
feels
another
that
5
way.
while we're speaking right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Just coming out of the woodwork.
I mean, is that a problem?
Unclear. We don't know yet. I think, look, there are definitely benefits and drawbacks to having everyone who's ever registered as a Democrat running for president.
Today I'd like to announce, but no.
Yeah, right. I think on balance, it is a good thing for the party that we have this many people out there talking about the issues we care about, getting people excited, and the one thing about this field is I've never seen a field that is so diverse and so talented. Mm-hmm. You sometimes have a few stars at the top and then a bunch of people where you're like, why are they running?
Right.
I think you have 5, 6, 7, 8 candidates who all have some really, really excited supporters and followers. And I think that's a good thing. We are going to try to interview every single candidate. My company will be annoyed that I'm saying this, but we're hoping to do it before the first debate at the end of June.
Okay. You heard it here.
That's the ideal.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll get there.
Yep.
But they're not making it easy on us.
Yep.
But we're trying. We're going to be hopefully speaking to Governor Inslee up in Concord when we go up there Sunday. Mm-hmm. I'm hopefully speaking to Kamala Harris on Tuesday.
Cool.
And then we're going to just keep booking.
Yep. Keep booking.
Keep booking. And every time, and the way that we're doing it is basically how the DNC is doing it. The people who get 65,000 donors or are at 0 to 1% in the polling, we're going to try to have on the show.
Archetypes? Any archetypes right now among the candidates? Dark horse, darling, front runner, heir apparent. I don't know.
Here's the way I look at the field right now. I think Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders you have to call them front runners.
Yep.
I don't think they're not quite traditional front runners in the sense that I don't think their leads are overwhelming.
Yeah.
But
they're running against a pretty untraditional president potentially.
That is correct. Although I don't think that their leads are just about name ID either.
Fair.
At this point, I think it's some about name ID, but there was a poll out from California Democrats, and of course, Kamala Harris's name ID in California is got to be very,
massive.
very, very high, massive.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders still had their leads in that state. So they're front runners, but they both have their issues as well. So I don't think they're strong front runners.
Yep.
And then I think you now have a pack in the middle, a tier in the middle that's Kamala, Warren, Beto, Buttigieg.
Yep.
Maybe, and then like maybe right beneath that is like Booker and Klobuchar.
Okay.
And that seems to me that's how the field looks to me right now. And then there's a whole bunch of people below them who may not stay below them either, right? Like this, nothing would surprise me,
right,
in this primary at all.
Right.
And I mean, a couple months ago, no one really knew who Pete Buttigieg was, and now he's
the new hotness.
Yeah, now he's the new hotness. And so, could that happen to some of the other candidates who are currently polling at 0, 1, 2%? Possibly. And there's a whole bunch of candidates who still aren't in the race yet.
You guys recently interviewed Buttigieg, and I think soon after that, there was a piece in Current Affairs that was pretty unflattering. And I only read part of it, but it was essentially at least...
It was very long. I couldn't get through it all. I'll be honest.
It was very long. What do you think about that piece? What's your reaction? I mean, the biggest criticism that I saw in the piece was essentially like, when you ask him about policy, he's like, oh, we're too focused on policy, but he doesn't really have any policy. That was kind of the argument being made in the section that I read. But how are you feeling about him as a candidate and especially after reading part of that piece?
It's been very cool to watch. I met Mayor Pete about a year ago.
Okay.
And he came to LA and we had coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And
what was his haircut like then?
Same.
Okay.
Same.
Will it get better?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Fair.
But it's funny because when I met him, I recognized him, and he was like, "Yeah, the last time I saw you, it was during the 2008 campaign in Chicago, and I was doing a stint at the DNC as a staffer." He's like, "And we were at some party together." And I was like, "Oh, that's where I know you from." And we had this great chat, and I liked him a lot. But I'll be completely honest, I left that chat not having an inkling of an idea that he would ever be a presidential candidate. But I do think I think what has excited people about him is he is super thoughtful, particularly in diagnosing some of the problems, especially structural problems that we've had in politics, and basically some of the framing that has been done about the Democratic Party, basically by the Republican Party, right? And so he talks about freedom in a different way, and he talks about community in a different way. And so I think he's been very adept at sort of diagnosing some of the problems that we face in politics right now, and particularly the Democrats face. Look, I think if he goes through the entire campaign like that and doesn't come out with any policies, then yeah, of course that criticism is valid.
Yep.
But it is April
right.
of 2019, and I can remember being on the Obama campaign at this time.
Right.
And the knock against us was Barack Obama has no policies. It's all hope and change. It's all platitudes. Hillary Clinton's rolling out a policy every new day. That's the way to win this thing, and Barack Obama's never going to go anywhere.
How'd that work out?
Yeah, right.
Right.
But I will also say, and I think I said this on the pod sometime, I can remember an SEIU forum on healthcare early on, probably around April of 2007. And Hillary Clinton goes out there and is brilliant and lays out her healthcare policy in detail. John Edwards goes out there, is very smart, has his policy all laid out. Barack Obama goes out there and speaks in platitudes and sort of big picture about what we need to do in healthcare. And he came off that stage and was like, I never want to be that unprepared again. And I'm mad that I don't have this stuff ready. And, got his team to get going and turned out his healthcare policy. So I think that in the next several months, you'll see people like Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, and other candidates who are just starting to get in the race now actually come out with sort of real policies, details. And some of them already have that's just not getting coverage. Like, Beto runs around with a Medicare for America plan that he talks about that he's endorsed. But, the media thing is that he doesn't have any policies. And Pete has also endorsed a whole bunch of specific policies as well. But I do think these candidates need their own policies. You want to put your own stamp on the debate we're having, the policy debate we're having. Elizabeth Warren comes out with a new policy every single day.
So this was going to be my next question, right? Elizabeth Warren, we're in Massachusetts, right? Like Elizabeth Warren, like, you know, the gif of the cat mashing the keyboard. Like I feel like that cat is writing for her Medium account. Her policies have really been, I mean, she's been like putting them out. She's got a ton of policy ideas. And I think at one point, at least a couple of years ago, I'll just say this anecdotally, a couple of years ago, like everyone I talked to was super pumped about her. And I guess that's kind of weird because that's when Hillary Clinton was running. I remember like a New Yorker piece about them meeting and this sort of strange theater of that for both of them. But just anecdotally, a lot of the people I talk to now are like not as hot on her.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of people point to her fight with Trump about her ancestry and how she handled that. So I don't know. Where do you think she's at in the race? And
yeah. So I love Elizabeth Warren. I do not love her just because she puts out a ton of policy.
Mm-hmm.
I like her because she is incredibly wonky, but when she talks, she turns all that wonk into a very compelling narrative about what's wrong with our economy and what we have to do to fix it.
Yeah.
And she has stories that she tells that goes with it. And by the way, she has a strategy for how she's going to get this stuff passed.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely do not subscribe to the Elizabeth Warren rolls out a policy every day, and yet the media hates that. And so that's why she's not winning. Like, no. And that's not the reason that I'm really compelled by her. I'm compelled by her because she is a very compelling speaker. She has a theory of the case. She has a message. She has policies to back that up. And then she has a strategy to achieve those policies. So why is she not leading the field right now? It's possible that the fight with Trump had something to do with that. But I think we forget that before that fight with Trump, she was a Democratic Party. She was like the boogeyman of the Democratic Party, along with Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and some of the other figures for a very long time since she first came into politics.
You mean by like forcing them left or just being...
Republicans Republicans decided nationally that they would run ads back in 2012, even before that maybe, that would include Elizabeth Warren because she was,
crazy.
She was scaring off Wall Street.
Right.
And I've met Democrats since now the Democratic Party has a bunch of rich finance people in it who are more socially liberal and fiscally conservative. And you talk to people on Wall Street and they are very scared that Elizabeth Warren is coming after their, $100 billion profits.
And so bad for them.
Right, so bad for them. So I do think that she has been... Her name, when you look at the polls, her name ID is almost as high as Bernie's and Biden's, which is unusual for someone who has not run for national office.
So it's thanks to the Republicans.
I think Republicans have been beating up on Elizabeth Warren for years.
Wow.
Not as long as, Hillary Clinton had the problem that Republicans have been beating up on her for like 30, 40 years.
Right.
Elizabeth Warren hasn't had that problem. But I do think... there's a lot of people who, when they think Elizabeth Warren, they think of the person they've seen in some awful RNC ad or a Fox News segment.
Right.
I think that she is the candidate most likely to, well, there's a couple like this, but when people meet her in person, and Iowa is the perfect state for that, and I think that's why she's invested a ton in Iowa. When people meet her in person, they're going to say, oh, that's not the Elizabeth Warren that I've heard about or read about. She's warm and she's compelling and I really like what she had to say. Like, I would wager that that's happening a lot on the ground in Iowa in a way that's not quite breaking through in the national narrative just yet.
Should AOC be running?
Well, she can't because she's not 35.
Oh, she's too young. That's right.
So I don't have to answer that.
But if she could run, if she was 35... should she be running, considering sort of where she's at right now? Just in terms of, it seems like in a way...
everyone's running, so why not? She's a member of Congress.
Fair. But...
We got mayors in there now. We got... We got random people who've never been anything. I don't know. People with no elected office are running now.
Right. But I guess what I mean by that is you worked for someone who was in the Senate for a very short time. And in some ways that, Barack Obama was really struck while the iron was hot in terms of how people were thinking about him. And even if there wasn't, some people made this argument, there wasn't a lot of there. In terms of the awareness about him, it was the right time. And so I guess I see how good she is on Twitter. I see how good she is at clapping back. And in some ways,
which is exactly what you're looking for in a president. Can this president clap back?
But I mean, seriously, Donald Trump, in a way, you wonder if Donald Trump, in a way, is going to pick the candidate just by nature of who he decides to attack and how much. So,
I mean, look, I don't. I never say should a candidate run or not. I think a lot of these pieces and takes that I've seen over the last couple of months, this one should run, this one shouldn't run,
right,
are so silly to me. Let the person run and let the voters decide. That's who decides whether you should run or not. Ultimately, the ballot.
Fair.
So if she wanted to run, great. I think if you're going to run for president, the first question you have to ask yourself is, can I do this job? Not can I win? Can I do this job? When I am sitting in the Oval Office, knowing that a president, a president usually has to decide between a bad option and a worse option. And Obama always used to say, if a decision gets to his desk, it's because no one else in the federal government, no one else in the country
is willing or able.
Could figure this out.
Yeah.
And so if it gets to his desk, it's not like he's faced with a really great option and a really bad option.
Right.
Because those decisions usually get taken care of at a lower level. And so you have to ask yourself, can I do the job? Can I make these really tough decisions that aren't necessarily going to make a lot of people happy?
Yeah.
But that I believe are the right decisions because they're right. And look, there's certainly more that goes into running for president than years of legislative, executive, or other kind of political experience, right? I mean, one thing that we used to say on the Obama campaign, one of the big reasons I think he was able to succeed in the primary is he said, I may not have had a lot of experience, but I had the judgment to be against the war in Iraq when a lot of people in the Democratic Party were for it. And for him, that was a huge proof point that it's you've got all these people who have a combined, 50, 60 years in Washington, but that all that experience led them to trust George Bush on going into Iraq. So where does that leave us now? And Barack Obama, who had just gotten to the Senate, was like, I was on the right side of that.
Fair. Let's talk about Holy Cross and Worcester. How do you say Worcester?
Worcester.
All right. Just checking. He checks out. He seems legit. And I also want to say that this event would not have happened without Holy Cross alum Paul LaCamera. Are you here, Paul? You around? No, he didn't come. He's gone.
His wife is here. I know. I met her.
Oh, well, tell him we said he's awesome. Howdy. And also, I want to give big ups to Reverend Philip Burrows, the Holy Cross president, and also, hand for both of them. And also Dan Kim, VP of Communications. Dan, are you here? Well, we'll give him a little clap anyway. Dan Kim, thank you. Thank goodness Jon Favreau attended Holy Cross.
That's what I say every day.
Were you? Did you go to Ralph's Diner? Ralph's Diner. Anybody?
Go to Ralph's Diner.
Okay.
Where's Ralph's Diner?
It's in Worcester. I've been there once. It was weird, but great. What was your Worcester hangout? Did you have one?
I went to a lot of the bars in Worcester because I had a bunch of friends from high school who went to WPI, Assumption, Clark, and so we would always meet so I'd go to the different campuses, hang out with my high school friends.
Yep.
But we lived on campus freshman and sophomore year in Lehigh.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Autumn Chase junior year. I don't know if that still exists as a place for people to live. And then senior year, I lived in the crack house, which I know is people know, which was named like that because there was a crack in the foundation, is what we told our parents.
Did you study classical piano? As I read,
wow,
in
deep dive.
Your college paper.
I studied music theory. The first 2 years I was at Holy Cross.
Okay.
Because I had taken piano lessons and sort of played competitively all through high school.
Uh-huh.
And so I thought that maybe I would do that in college. And then I realized I probably wasn't quite good enough to do that. And then I was also getting too interested in politics by my sophomore year of college.
Are there any similarities between like theory and speech writing?
Yeah, I sort of learned this. I didn't really learn it. It just sort of happened when I was learning to write speeches, particularly for Obama, is that there is a rhythm that's important to speeches. And it's not, I guess it's something that you can be taught, but I wasn't. I just sort of picked it up. I remember like after the New Hampshire speech, which was the Yes We Can speech.
Yep.
A reporter reached out to me and was like, did you realize that some of that speech was in iambic pentameter, and did you plan that? And I was like,
yes, definitely.
And I was like, Googling iambic pentameter. No, I did not plan that. So it's sort of by osmosis, but I think my music background probably helped in that regard.
Can you just briefly tell this story that I feel like is part of your story about this thing that happened, I think, backstage at the DNC?
Yeah.
With you and Obama. So you had been working for John Kerry.
Mm-hmm.
You had been, as I understand it, actually collecting radio samples to provide to him. Is that right?
I was
his team.
I was a press assistant for a while, and that involved, taking press calls, doing press clips.
Okay.
Part of it was something called radio actualities, which is getting sound from the candidate, and then you'd send that to like rural radio stations.
Oh,
and they
got
would
it.
Just play it.
Okay.
It probably doesn't happen anymore.
Sure.
It was an Iowa thing.
And then the campaign kind of faltered, and there was a dearth in speech writing talent, and you kind of stepped into that role for him.
Yeah,
right.
They couldn't afford to hire a deputy speechwriter because the campaign was losing money and was maybe going to lose to Howard Dean.
Fair.
So they let me step into the role of.
They were like, "Hey, how about for no more money, you come do this now?"
This thing's got a shelf life of a couple of months anyway, so let's give it a whirl.
So, tell me about this thing that happens backstage at DNC.
So I was the deputy speechwriter. Chief speechwriter was on the road with John Kerry preparing for his convention speech. My job was to come to Boston and sit backstage and then make sure that all the speeches that were being delivered at the convention were on message with the Kerry campaign's message. So I was editing a bunch of people's speeches. And I get a call from the road from my boss, Josh Gottheimer, who's now a congressman in New Jersey. And he was the chief speechwriter. And he said, okay, there's a problem with the draft of the speech being delivered by State Senator Barack Obama. It's the keynote. And I'm like, what's the problem? I read over that speech. It's amazing, And he's like, well, there's a line in that speech that John Kerry wants to use in his speech. And I was like, so? And he's like, well, he has to change it. And I'm like, okay, well, again, why are you calling me? And he's like, well, we want you to ask him to change it.
Whoa.
And I was 21 at the time. So
who's 21? All right. So you have to go to the president or the future president. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
I walk down the hall and, because apparently Obama is practicing his speech on teleprompter for the very first time. And I walk into the room and I see Robert Gibbs there. Robert Gibbs had been my boss in the Kerry campaign when I was press assistant. He quit during the shakeup and then went to go work for State Senator Barack Obama. And so I was like, oh, this will be easy. So I said, hey, Gibbs, I just got a call from the road. Can you tell him to change the line? And Gibbs is like, no. Like, I'm not telling him that. He's like, that's one of his favorite lines. He's like, you go tell him. So now Obama sees there's some commotion, and he's like, what's going on? And I introduce myself, and I walk up to him, and I tell him everything that I was supposed to tell him. And then he sort of like got up within an inch of my face, and he looked down at me, and I don't know what he said because I think I blacked out at that moment. Wasn't great.
So wait, is that because Kerry or his people read Obama's speech and then wanted to take a line?
This is the dispute.
Okay.
The Kerry people will tell you it just happened to be that both lines ended up in both speeches. The Obama people will tell you, no.
Right.
I don't know, because the way that Josh said it to me was there's a line in the speech he wants to use.
Right.
So who knows?
Does that work in college?
Yeah, right.
Interesting. Okay.
So Obama was not happy. And then a mustached man came over to me and said, son, let's step outside and rewrite the line together. It was David Axelrod. It was the first time I met him. And so Axe and I step out into the hall and we rewrite the line. And all was well. And I thought to myself, it's too bad that I will never speak to Barack Obama again, because I think that's a really fantastic speech. And then, a year later, when he sat down to interview me for the job, the interview went well because he did not remember it was me. And then fast forward a year later, when I was in the Senate office, we were all sort of sitting around chatting and reminiscing, and the convention speech came up, and Obama turned to Gibbs and he's like, do you remember that little shit who came up to me?
And you're like,
asked me to change the line, and I was like, that was me. And he's like, I would have never hired you. But and then he laughed so hard, he thought it was the funniest thing. Yeah. So he had a good sense of humor about it.
We're getting tight on time, and I want to ask you just a couple more sort of quick questions here, if possible, and then do some Q&A if possible. Trump, the way that Trump talks is really interesting to me.
Yeah, you'd say that.
I'll put it that way. And I as a speechwriter, I would assume that you've thought about this a little bit. And I've been really struck by the difference in video footage I see of the president and descriptions of how he speaks in private. And there's a certain amount of that switching that happens, right? When you're speaking to the public, you're talking one way. When you're speaking to the private, or when you're speaking in private, doing the sort of work of your job, you speak another way. But is that interesting to you? Has that struck you at all? Sort of, does he seem smarter in descriptions of how he talks in private? I feel like the way he speaks in public is a very certain thing.
Yeah. But I don't.
Sorry, I don't know if that makes sense.
I guess I don't know how he speaks in private and how different that is. I mean, because you get all of this from sources, and I think the sources might make him sound smarter than he is.
They're not directly quoting him usually. They're sort of describing an interaction or something. Yeah.
I'm most struck by, if you watch videos of Trump 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it does seem like he has clearly lost a step. I mean, there was a video, and I'm not a psychologist. I can't diagnose anything. I'm not a medical person, so I won't go there. But there was a video of him, one of his first interviews. I think he was being interviewed by Tom Brokaw, and he's talking about real estate on the Today Show, and he was very articulate. And now maybe it was because the subject is real estate, and that's the one thing he knows. But I just couldn't believe it was the same person as the guy we hear now, who now just walks up to the press corps outside the White House, and instead of saying hello, just goes, no collusion, no collusion, no collusion.
Yeah, it's strange.
And it's also, I mean, as a speechwriter, there's this funny thing where when he does have prepared remarks, and the few times he actually reads off prepared remarks, it does sound like he's reading a hostage statement.
Mm-hmm.
And he seems very uncomfortable, and it's not great delivery. And that happens with all public figures, right? The difference between reading prepared remarks and speaking off the cuff. That's why, you try to memorize your remarks or you try to read off a prompter because that helps. And with Trump, it's particularly noticeable because Trump off the cuff, which is what we usually get, is so distinct that when he's forced to read like Stephen Miller's horrible writing, it very much feels like he is trapped and unhappy with that speech.
Cool. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Just really quickly, lightning round, Pod Save, and Crooked Media. Why'd you create the company?
Part of it was obviously spurred on by Trump winning, and we thought we were retired from politics, and Hillary Clinton would be president, and we could all just ride off into the sunset. And that didn't happen, so we felt like we really needed to be involved. But prior to Trump winning, while we were in the Obama administration, Dan, Tommy, Lovett, myself, we're all very big media critics.
Yep.
As you can hear. And part of that critique was not even necessarily ideological or partisan. My belief is when you get to the end of watching the nightly news, you're oftentimes left feeling pretty helpless.
Yeah.
You just covered a lot of really tough problems in the world, really bad news. And because a lot of good news doesn't make the nightly news.
Yeah.
And just having all that wash over you and having this feeling of helplessness that you can't do anything about it, I think it feeds apathy, it feeds cynicism, it feeds all the things that hurt our politics. And as someone who cares about politics so much and cares about change and social change, I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a media company where you can diagnose the problem, but then also tell people, here's what you can do to change it, that you actually have agency to change the world around you, to organize, to become active. And that's sort of the basis for the company. And can we do it in an entertaining way? So it's not just, feeding people a bunch of boring statistics and information or having people yell at each other all day long. Everyone's like, well, don't you want to have a bunch of Republicans on? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to have conservatives on and have like an interesting conversation. I'm not interested in recreating a CNN panel where people are screaming at each other because you might call that bipartisanship. I don't think that's helping anyone.
Right.
Having people yell at each other. I'd rather have a thoughtful conversation with someone for 30 minutes on a podcast than scream talking points at each other for 5 minutes on cable. So that's sort of the fundamental idea behind the company.
What else, other than that sort of nice cocktail, what else did you do in setting up the company that you really have felt like has led directly to its success?
The first two hires we made, Tanya Somanader was in the digital team in the White House, right? Sort of ran the digital team there, and we hired her to be our chief content officer, and she is brilliant beyond anything, and she continues to grow all of the content that we produce. She knows what the brand are. She is responsible and has done a fantastic job making sure we have a wide variety of diversity, not only in who we hire, but in the content that we create. And then Sarah Wick is our COO and knows business and was at Disney and Maker before this, and is brilliant at setting up a business, knowing what's right, and all that kind of stuff. So those two women have grown and run our company, and without them, we would be nothing.
This is my super brief, shameless plug. I make a podcast about the website Reddit, which we didn't get to talk to, but we should talk about sometime. It gets pretty weird on there.
I've heard.
And amazing too. But we think a lot about music. And I learned recently that maybe you guys picked the theme music for the show in part because of its similarity to the Top Gun theme song or the Top Gun anthem, which I then looked up and I was like, wow, this is really, it's not the same. It's not
very similar.
It's very similar. It's not a David Bowie Vanilla Ice situation, but it is very similar. Is that true?
It's not because, no. We love it. Knew some people.
Can anyone sing it? Can you sing it?
I'm not going to.
Okay. It's like do something like that, right?
And we had someone send us a bunch of potential theme songs, and we heard that one, and we're like, oh, this sounds great. And then the more we heard it, we're like, this kind of sounds like the Top Gun theme song. And we were like, well, we have a little podcast, so who cares? And then it just kept it. Now we love it.
It's great. I think we have to wrap and maybe do some short Q&A if we have time for that. Do we have some time for that?
Sure.
Yes? Okay, great. Guys, give it up.
Oh, wow.
Give it up for this man here. Do we have any questions? 1 minute. Okay. In the meantime, I guess I'll ask you something else. Why not? Are you guys gonna like bottle and distribute Love It? Because I would. I'll take. Yeah, a piece for sure. He's great.
He is great. He is great.
He's like the old dirty bastard, I feel like, of your group. If anyone is a Wu-Tang Clan fan, I feel like he's that one.
Yeah, I hired Love It for the White House staff, knowing based on recommendations from people that like he is incredibly funny and brilliant, difficult to manage, but incredibly funny and brilliant. And then there's this other guy who is solid but will never give you any trouble. And I had coffee with Love It in DC, and after 30 minutes I was like, oh, I'm going with this guy for sure. And look, did he come into the White House sometimes at 10 a.m. on a scooter and gym shorts? Yes, he did.
Yeah. I've heard him sing the praises of the scooter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did he write brilliant speeches? Absolutely. So.
Got it. Okay. So is Spencer following Spencer Ronan?
Spencer is real. Spencer is not Ronan. Spencer is Spencer's lowest friend. I've hung out with him before. He just really doesn't care that much about us. But he's real.
That was Alex, by the way, who does a lot of our programming here at City Space. I can read them to you if you would like that. Who are your role models pre-DC, and how have you viewed mentorship in your career as you have transitioned from writing to media and podcasting?
My role models were my professors at Holy Cross. I'm not just saying that.
Oh man,
fuck up because we're here.
He read the room.
And I should say, I am where I am today because I've had the most fantastic set of teachers throughout my life, starting with my mother and father, going into the high school teachers that I had and the elementary and high school teachers I had at North Reading, and then the wonderful mentors at Holy Cross, particularly Stephanie Ewell, Karen Dubnoff, Mary Erdmans, fantastic professors who helped me not only develop a love of politics, but actually, believe that I could go do something to change the world. So I'm very grateful for that.
Cool. How will millennials and Generation Z shape the 2020 election?
I hope significantly. I mean, recent poll, like Trump's losing, in a poll where he's like a slight underdog for re-election, like maybe it's he's down by a few points. He's losing millennials like 53 to 38. Republicans lost Generation Z by a similar amount.
Yep.
And so now you have two generations out there that the Republicans have lost by 20, 30 points. If they show up, it's over. There will be no Donald Trump. There will be no Republicans in power. If they do not, they will remain. So, like, the power to shape this country, to shape the world, is in the hands of young people to show up. And it is all about, forget about persuading your crazy Republican uncle. Like, go find your friends who don't care about politics and make them care about politics and get out there and vote.
Everybody hear that? Show up. Aside from voting, what are the most important things an average citizen can do to make their voices heard?
You can sign up to volunteer in a campaign, which there will be plenty of opportunities, and not just on the presidential level, by the way. As I said, the Senate campaigns are super important. We have some tough seats in the House that we're defending because we need to protect the House.
Yep.
There are state legislature seats. There's attorney general races. There's secretary of state races. There's gubernatorial races. Go find a campaign that you care about in your community. Knock on doors, volunteer, make phone calls. It's not only very, very important, but it makes you always feel good after you do it. Even though you might get the door slammed in your face a couple times, which you will, you feel better having real conversations with people than like scrolling through Twitter and yelling at people that way.
That seems like a good thing to close on. Thank you guys all for being here. Couple more quick announcements. As you leave, please, if you're interested in coming back to City Space, please give us your email so that we can be in touch. We have all kinds of different programming here all of the time, and we're really ramping up. It's a new space. People like me who make podcasts about the internet will be here on stage playing gift games and doing a choose your own 80s and 90s movie adventure night. And other things as well. Alex, Amy, any other quick announcements? We good? Thanks a lot, guys, and thanks to Jon.
Thanks, Ben.
In Progressive Insurance, comparing car insurance rates from multiple insurers so shoppers can evaluate options in one place. Now